So this is our last set of notes in our last group of sources in our geography unit, G5. G5 is comparison of world regions, where we will be comparing sources to source 1, which you see in front of you, which is also in your binder, which is the pre-AP World Regions Map. In the pre-AP teacher guide, it says that it is essential that students be provided with opportunities to think deeply about how we organize and regionalize the world. Regions are often taught individually without much investigation into why someone has decided that certain countries belong in certain regions, let alone any debate about the strengths and the weaknesses of a given regionalization. So the source explorations in G5 are designed to help you become intimately familiar with the course World Regions Map, that's source 1, as a common frame of reference, while at the same time arming yourselves with information so that you're able to critique or be critical of this map and how it regionalizes the world. The summary for G5 is that humans define regions in an attempt to categorize and organize geographic space. They do so through comparative processes based on physical, cultural, population/human development, economic, and political characteristics. So G5A, those sources are all going to be about global cultural patterns. And if you remember, we are trying to support and challenge the claim that source 1, the regions map, is based on cultural and economic patterns. So this is probably going to be an important group of sources. So connections between linguistics, which is language, linguistics and religious traditions greatly shape how we organize space and how we create regions around various parts of the world. So for example, the Middle East, Northern Africa, and West Africa share the same language. Their primary language is Arabic, and they also share the same religion, Islam. Instances of overlap between religious regions and linguistic regions are very common. That is not unusual to have countries with the same primary language to also share the same religion, but there are definitely exceptions to that. Besides the sources in class, here would be an example of another cultural region. So in class, you're going to look at the most common languages around the world. This map shows the second most common first language in nearly every country in the world. So this map shows more of the immigrant influence on the regions. The sources for G5B are all about global demographic and development patterns. So demographic is population. So demo means the people. So regions can be defined by population characteristics, for example, population density, birth rates and death rates, and by patterns of human development, which are quality of life measures. Quality of life is the general well-being of individuals and of societies. So, for example, the quality of their education or their access to healthcare or employment or access to wealth or feeling of safety. Population density is the number of people that are living in a unit of area, such as a square mile. In addition to the regions that you're going to look at when you do G5B, another type of demographic region would be shown on this map right here, which is what different countries around the world value most. So it says that more than 80,000 people from around the world express their opinions on what they value most in life. And so this shows the #1 priority in almost every country in the world. So you see up here on the top, this is our key or our legend. And so when you look, you can see, for instance, that the United States and also Peru. Their number one, what they value most is life satisfaction. The country to our north, Canada, they value health the most. The country to our south, Mexico, they value education the most. So you can see the differences around the world. Another type of population or demographic region would be cost of living around the world. And so this is a measure of quality of life. So cost of living is the amount of money that's needed to cover basic expenses such as your housing, your food, how much you have to pay in taxes, how much healthcare costs in a certain place and within a specific time period. So you see the key, the darker the color, the more expensive the cost of living is, and the lighter the color, the less expensive the cost of living is. So you can see that the United States and Canada, we are tending towards the darker color, but we're not the darkest. Switzerland is the absolute darkest. Switzerland and Iceland have the highest cost of living. And then you see areas that are like the light green, those would be the lowest costs of living. And then areas that are gray, just no data. Over here, this is just another type of region. So this is looking at population lights at night taken from space. And so this can be related to population density, but also can be related to access to stuff like electricity or automobiles with headlights. So this again could be population density, but it also includes other information. So our last set of sources is on economic and political patterns around the globe. And so there's some terms that you definitely need to know. So the first is gross domestic product, or GDP. And this is the total value of goods and services that are produced in a country during a specific time period. That time period is usually a calendar year. GDP per capita is per person. So this would just be dividing a country's GDP by the population. So when you see the GDP per capita, you can think of it as the average amount of money that a person in that country makes in a year. That is not what that number is, but it's not far off from the average amount of income. And so just one way to look at it so that you can kind of gauge the wealth or lack of wealth in a country. Then we have the democracy index, and that measures the state of democracy around the world. And it's based on information such as elections and civil rights and how the government functions. And that is one of your sources. And the democracy index classifies each country as either a full democracy, flawed democracy, hybrid regime, or authoritarian regime. And those four classifications are also included as part of your sources. So some other examples of political and economic regions other than the ones in your sources. So this map on the left, this would be human rights scores. So you see there is sort of like a number line going all the way to -4 on the left, +4 on the right. And so the higher the value, the higher towards the right, that blue, then the better the human rights protection that country offers. The further away it is towards those oranges and reds, then the worse off that country has for human rights protections. So that is another way of regionalizing countries around the world. Also over here we have economic regions. So this would be trading blocks. So you learned last year about NAFTA, and you learned about the European Union. So countries often join together in these trading blocks, so where they remove barriers between themselves for importing and exporting goods, but then they also trade as a block with other trading blocks around the world, so it gives them sort of power in numbers. That is all of our notes for G5. So I hope this all makes sense, and it'll help you when you are doing your source organizer and analyzing your sources.